The Coffs Harbour part of the north coast was very difficult to get to because of the surrounding mountains to the west, the ocean to the east, and the high headlands and rivers to the north and south. For this reason, Woolgoolga and Coffs Harbour were some of the last areas to be settled on the north coast. About the mid-1870s, men arrived to mine and cut cedar along the Orara Valley. Gold mines were being worked, many of them quite successfully. Many of these mines closed within 10 years, but the men and their families stayed in the district. They developed farms to grow crops of vegetables, corn and sugarcane, as well as breeding cattle, horses, pigs and poultry. Much of this produce needed to be transported to the cities so it could be sold. This was mostly impossible because of the distance and bad roads, and with just wagons and carts pulled by bullocks and horses to get there. Firstly by hauling the goods to Tynedale on the Clarence River, then shipping their goods by sea to the cities. Both Coffs Harbour and Woolgoolga had some shelter from the sea for loading ships, but everything had to be taken to the anchored ships in rowing boats and loaded up onto the decks. Timber was in big demand for buildings and furniture, and Coffs and Woolgoolga had many square miles of timber. This gave the locals a chance to make money and earn a living, but getting the timber to markets was all but impossible. It wasn't long before a great deal of agitation and requests were put to the government of the day to build jetties so they could load their goods onto the ships. Meetings were held at Woolgoolga, Coffs Harbour, Kuramba, Orara, Bellingen and Repton. These meetings were held in houses, hotels and halls. There were promises from the government, but nothing ever happened. The citizens kept requesting, and the government kept promising. The promises and the requests went on for nearly 10 years. Then finally, in 1889, newspapers announced that 2 jetties would be built, one at Woolgoolga, the other one at Coffs Harbour. These jetties were both finished in 1892. The cost of the Coffs Harbour jetty was £12,482, 1 shilling and 8pence. It wasn't long before a bigger crane was added and an extra railway line was also added, but for the next 20 years nothing more was done to protect the harbour. Ten years after the jetty was finished, the next major development for Coffs Harbour was about to begin. The North Coast Line really began in 1887 with the first part between Newcastle and Maitland and Casino and Murwillumbah. In 1910 the Kyogle to Grafton section was finished. The Maitland to Taree line was completed in 1913. In 1915 Taree to Wauchope, Grafton to Glenray, and because the Urunga Bar was silting up, the rally to Coffs Harbour was open to get produce to the ships via the Coffs Jetty. In 1917, Wauchope to Kempsey was opened. 2 years later, the Kempsey to Maxwell was finished in 1919. 1923, Maxwell to Urunga and Coffs to Glenrayers opened. A lot of work was carried out building the Glenray to Dorrigo line, which was opened in 1924. The Kyogle to Brisbane part of the line was finished in 1930. This part of the North Coast Railway crosses the Queensland border at the Richmond Gap. In 1932, the North Coast line was finally finished. It took 22 years to build. 40 years later, the Glenray to Dorrigo line closed. Going back to 1911, when the Coffs Harbour to Raleigh line began. The line from Raleigh to Coffs Harbour was opened. It was finished 8 years later in 1919. Building the North Coast line from Coffs Harbour, it continued towards the mountain ranges. There were a lot of very fiery debates, as many wanted the railway line to go through Woolgoolga. There was some big trees to be cleared and a number of tunnels to be built, as well as a lot of big cuttings. Workers lived in makeshift dwellings. A bush nursing hospital was established in 1912 to cater for railway workers. It was organised by Mrs. Love, wife of the railway engineer in charge. There were 200 draft horses held in the horse depot between Jarrett and Boamby Street. The horses were all hand-fed. The railway was built through the hills with steam-driven machines and hand labour. Experienced miners were employed to build the tunnels. 1,400 men were employed building the North Coast line in 1917. Because of all the men, their wives and children, a town was set up on the Red Hill. It was officially named Coffs Heights. It had its own post office, a school and also a social hall. The railway to Glenray was opened in 1922. Another difficult project was the Glenray to Dorrigo line. This line also had tunnels and a lot of bridges plus mountain country. It was opened in 1924. It was a very steep line and it had up to 1 in 30 grades. The Brooklana Bridge at Bobo was one of the many bridges on the line. There was a lot of washaways in October in 1972. Now, because of the economics of the line, it was not put back into service. The Grafton Bridge over the Clarence River was opened in 1932. Before that, when the train reached South Grafton, passengers had to leave the train and cross the Clarence River by ferry. The train was driven onto a barge and taken across the river. It was unloaded there and put onto the railway line where passengers would rejoin it. When the bridge was finally opened in the 1930s, it was unique in its design. Cars and horses crossed on the top deck and trains crossed on the bottom deck. There were a few accidents, like this engine which didn't stop in time at South Grafton, and the landslide which caused by a burst water main on the Red Hill in 1974. It was always a big moment for the town when stations and lines were first opened. Some of the bridges on the North Coast line were redesigned and rebuilt. This is the Boambi Bridge being rebuilt. And this is the Coffs Creek Bridge being rebuilt.
Well, Misery, of course, was the nickname given to the school train that ran from Maxville to Coffs Harbour from 1944 to October the 1st, 1958, bringing these students up from the various railway stations and locations to attend the Coffs Harbour High School. Started off from Maxville and then picked up passengers at Warrimby, at Newick Creek, Nambucca Heads, Peterkins, Valor, Dalhousie Creek.
We go to school in Misery, come home in misery too. In just a few lines I'll do my best to tell you what we do. From Raleigh Station every day we catch the same old train. No sooner are we in the door than comes the old refrain. Pull your heads in, stop waving to the boys, shut the window, I'm ashamed of you. Girls, won't you stop that noise? Then up the hill we go to school, learn lessons all day long, and in the afternoon we hear the same familiar song. Pull your head in, stop waving to the girls, shut the window, I'm ashamed of you. Boys, won't you stop that noise? We pile back into Misery as she slowly chugs away. The prefects start the same old chant as they sing every day. Pull your heads in, stop waving to the boys, shut the window, I'm ashamed of you. Girls, won't you stop that noise? Then we reach our home stop and leave the dear old train. We still have ringing in our ears that tedious song again. Pull your head in, stop waving to the girls, shut the window, I'm ashamed of you. Boys, won't you stop that noise?
The railway refreshment rooms were first built in Sydney in the 1890s, and later on they were then built on the coast at the major stations, Kempsey, Coffs Harbour, Grafton, Casino, and by the early 1960s most of them had closed. The beach was so close to the railway station that when the train stopped en route to Brisbane or to the Murwillumbah, they were given a 35 to 40 minute stop in Coffs Harbour, which was ideal to give them a 20-minute swim, which probably half of the train took part in. Then they would come back, order their lunch or pick up their lunch or their breakfast, as was probably the most common meal, and then eat that on the train. Yes, there was a platform at Park Beach, and right up until 1975 when that was closed, but it was a real highlight of the Coffs Harbour area in the 1950s and 60s, because the excursion trains would travel from Grafton and Kempsey to Coffs Harbour, and most of the passengers got off at Park Beach to attend a picnic day at the Park Beach, enjoying the swimming, etc. that was there. It was a height of industry at the jetty and around the railway. We had the North Coast bulk freights in the railway yards. We had the cement in the railway yards. We had the Shell depot down the southern end, and we had the Caltex up the northern end. We had the poles being loaded by the Williams's mill, as well as the McCarthy operations. We had the BGF loading their bananas, and of course that was a big peak in the 1960s, sending so many bananas away. And you combine all that, it was such a busy area, and old photos will show how many lines were there. As well as that, we had our own goods shed, our own freight centre that brought up the railway parcels, the smaller ones. The jetty was very busy, loading the poles, shunted out there by the railway staff and their shunting engine to go to New Zealand to be shipped over on the Abel Tasman. And in the height of that activity, there were actually 2 cranes operating on the jetty. As well as that, right at where the old railway gates were located, we had the Nambucca Fishermen's Co-op, and in those days the Nambucca Fishermen's Co-op used to dispatch a lot of fish away on the train. To travel overnight, packed in ice, was fine the next morning when it hit Sydney. The height in recent years of the steam train coming up the coast was in 1988, in the bicentenary year, when we had the 3 steam engines down at the Coffs Harbour station all at once, which was probably a once in a lifetime thing and will never be seen again. We don't have the tracks there now to provide that, but we had 3801, 5910 and 3642. With the XPT here come to Coffs Harbour firstly in 1985 and caused a lot of excitement, and the promotion centred around its ability to stop and to pick up speed at the location, so that the stopping at various stations did not necessarily delay it, because it had this ability to pick up speed straight away. It had the ongoing meals provided on the trains and the air conditioning, which is first and second class, but it also took off approximately 2 hours travel from here to Sydney on the old Brisbane Expresses and Gold Coast motor rail. And they provided services by day and by night between here and Sydney and Coffs Harbour and Brisbane, as they still do today. So 30 years later, they are still very popular, the XPT train.
The jetty at Coffs Harbour didn't have any breakwalls to protect it from big seas. The jetty was built by Thomas Lawson and was 500 metres long and 6 metres wide. There was a 5-ton steam crane and a single-track rail line when it opened. It was put into operation in 1892. Many ships took freight and produce to Brisbane and Sydney. In 1905, a 7.5-ton crane was installed. In 1910, the steam crane was replaced by a 10-ton crane. From 1906 until 1916, the jetty loaded, on the average, of 400 ships a year. In 1912, there were 480 ships taking freight from Coffs Harbour, and that's between 8 and 9 ships a week. Because the ships cannot tie up to the jetty, a basket was used to unload passengers. A large crowd would always gather at the jetty to watch goods and passengers being unloaded. There was incredible congestion at the jetty area, and there are numerous tram lines. Tom Colvin's store near the British and Australian Timber Company tram line, a couple of small shops and the Pier Hotel. Despite the construction of the jetty, bad weather conditions made it impossible to load ships in strong winds or big swells. 6 proposals were put forward for construction of breakwalls. A bridge had to be built to South Coffs Island. There'd be a quarry for the rocks to build walls, starting with the north wall. So when you people arrived in Coffs, there was no breakwater at all?
No, just the north wall was just on the verge of being started.
Yeah.
They had the line along the front, coming from the public works, open cut, where they used to get the big stone from, across the big bridge, which is now half. You can just see a few of the tops of the old piles across on the southern end. Through that cutting and around, and used to come along the face of the harbour on the approach to the north wall.
Right.
And there they started to tip as they brought the stone in on the trucks.
Whereabouts did you go to school, Arch?
Coffs Harbour Jetty.
At the Coffs Harbour Jetty?
For a start, yes.
There was a school here?
Yes, there's 2 rooms.
Whereabouts?
Just up where the new high school is. Or more to the top of the hill, to the far end of the school, the southern end of the school. There was 2 rooms.
2 rooms, and that was the school?
That was the school. And down on the bottom, there used to be loco sheds, and then the bridge across to the other island.
Right, and that's how they got their stone?
That's how they got the stone out.
Right. Then they went on to the eastern wall of the wall.
Well, when they used to blast to get the big stone, small stone broke up and fell with it and just left the big ignite, and that's all they wanted. So to get rid of that small stone, all that where the boat ramp is now was water.
Yeah.
About, you could say about 25 feet deep. Right. Like from the level down to where the sand.
Yeah.
So they built an easterly internal wall in the harbour along, and then started to fill in between it and the bridge.
Right.
The steam loco and just what they call stone trucks just a plain sort of truck built on the four wheels, like they used to just have one big stone on one truck.
Right.
The trucks were consisted of the end tippers and side tippers. They had the cranes over at the face of the quarry.
Yeah.
Yes, they had big steam cranes over there. And they each gang had his own crane and his own men.
Right.
They had about 9 to 10 men in the gang.
There would still be a lot of hard work for the men.
Oh yes, my word. Yeah, they used to work them days. They'd have to shunt the trucks in along the line. As they kept building the wall out, extend the line along. As the wall grew, the line grew.
Yes, of course.
And then they'd come back at the base of where the pole dump is there now, and they had off lines there. They used to back off, but leave the trucks, because they used to bring about 10 trucks at a time from the face around the front, and they'd tip them and go back for another load. While they were over there unloading them, the gangs would have the other trucks ready for when the loco got back.
It was quite a
And
bit.
then they got the two locos then.
Yeah.
One was going and sea, another one was coming back.
Yeah. Do you remember any big seas?
Oh, yes, big seas, all right. They used to break right over the jetty. At the end, there was two big sheds on the end. There used to be two steam cranes there, run along the top of the jetty when they were whooshing up through and things like that. But I seen these two sheds go straight off there. Washed it, yeah. See how they roll over that now, and they throw those 40-ton blocks from one side to the other, and that's why you see them on the inside, because it's not payable to shift them, pick them up and put them back over. They just build new ones and tip them. Seeing the Coffs Harbour railway, foam up onto level with the platform, and all that in front used to be before the good shed and everything was built there. A bit of a hollow, and that used to be all full of, the waves used to break right over the road there. And we used to wash the approach of the line out and from the breakwater, and they'd have to repair it after big seas.
The eastern wall, that's the one on the sea face, was that always going to go where it was?
No, that was supposed to go as far again. It was supposed to go out past the Mutton Bird and cut the...
Well, that Pig Island, was it supposed to go out there?
No, it was on the same bevel
as what it is.
What it is now, but you say, well, it should have went as fur again. That would have cut the surge out of the harbour altogether.
Public works and maritime services would be pretty big those days.
Yeah, they were busy, yeah.
Yeah.
There was a lot of boats, loading boats. There were a lot of Union ships and the Able Tasman. There were quite a few different German ships. Really all of them just took timber. We used to have 3 at a time in there, tied up, 2 on one side and 1 on the other.
Did they have the steam cranes then?
Oh, yes. Yeah.
They could handle it all right?
Yep. 2 steam logos and a diesel one.
In those early years in the 60s, there was a lot of timber stored down there, wasn't there?
Oh, heaps and heaps. Yeah, they had a big order there. They had stacks and stacks and stacks on the northern depot of all Indian sleepers. They had only half load the ships here, then taken to Brisbane or Newcastle to finish loading them.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, they couldn't fully load here, wasn't enough water under them.
Do you remember the Woolgoolga Jetty?
I helped pull it down.
Was it?
Yeah, my brother was the foreman then.
How'd you get rid of the piles and that?
We had a big bulldozer up on the sand dunes up near the Woolgoolga Lakes. Just smashed all the pylons off in a full bay at a time. And just keep shorting the wire up and got them on the beach and snigged them up over the sand hill and burned them in a big heap up there.
Was it in good condition when you pulled it down?
No, the far end of it was really bad. There's a big sea knocked it all in.
You couldn't leave anything at the bottom. You had to clean everything away.
Everything had to be taken,
Did you use explosives?
Yeah, I did a lot of blasting there. I did a lot of blasting for the department.
And then what did you do mainly in the Coffs Jetty?
Mostly pile driving nearly all the time. But
Where?
we'd done all the big fenders underneath there. And at the time we put all great big rubber fenders under them. We had the boat harbour closed for about 6 or 7 months to do that job. In the 60-foot pile, 60 and 62-foot piles. All turp we drew, all turp piles.
How long would it take to drive a pile into a depth of 20 foot?
Oh, not very long to drive it. Yeah, we replaced a lot of piles there. Turpentine piles.
And were they treated before they were driven?
No, they used to just ring bark them in the bush and let the bark set on them. And then just fall them a bit later on, and then that was it. We used to just dress and put a shoe on.
I think they had bark on them when they actually drove them in?
Yeah, always. Oh yeah, don't take the bark. The pile was no good without if the bark was off.
And the jetty was widened and lengthened when you went there, but it still had steam cranes on it?
Oh yeah. Yeah, we had, we done most of our work with the steam crane, the old Grafton steam crane, we called it the Grafton.
Yeah.
And then there was another little one we used to, took them both out the jetty. But we had bigger ones in the depot and on the land, bigger crane run around in there, the 10-tonners and that, but we never took them on the jetty, they were too heavy.
You'd remember, of course, the big diesel electric ones when they came.
My brother Morrill put the first one up, put up there the diesel electric. Yeah.
I remember, I think it'd be easy to put the second one up, but putting that first one up on its own would be a bit hard.
Yeah, they had a big pole, but put them big special fenders under it. One boat would push against the other all the time. Sometimes the one boat would push the other one away a bit because it was all locked together underneath.
How far would it move?
3 sets of big rubbers in each side of it, so they'd probably go a couple of metres or so.
Ever see it in a big sea?
Yeah, been under there, Friedman under there with the ship sitting there. Sometimes they'd take the ship, pull them off the jetty, they couldn't leave them alongside, it would have broken.
And they'd put them out to sea?
Oh, they usually, sometimes it was too bad for them to get out, so they'd just pull out on the buoys and let the ropes go loose on the jetty and pull out, so that they were just swinging on the jetty. Well, most of the weight on the anchors out the front and on the buoy anchors. We had big buoys set off the side.
Remember the night the Bangalow went on the beach?
Yeah, I was at high school then.
Oh.
She's got a few fishing boats going on too.
Did it?
Yeah, rolled on top of, laid on top of our flats of fishing boat and flattened it out like a matchbox.
Yeah. Trouble is when it goes onto the beach, the sand suction and
yeah.
it would make it very difficult to get off. I don't know how they moved it in the end.
They did, they spun it around and got it off. They done a bit of work on it first. They put a strengthened the bulkhead and something in it with big timber girders and that. Tommy Bishop done a bit of work in that.
And then they took it back and repaired it.
Yeah, they got it off. But even they used to pick all the fishing boats up and set them on the jetty to clean them and that. But you would have seen that in your day down there too.
I went up on one.
Yeah.
I don't know why, but he had to lift an awful high. I was going to be 50 foot above the jetty. Yeah, it was a bit frightening.
And they had the two cranes on the big boat, and they didn't have that middle block between it. One bloke had to take the judgment of the other bloke, and they'd be a bit too much or not quite enough. But that's when it gets a bit hairy and frightening.
So you say there was 3 boats at a time tied to the jetty loading timber.
Yeah.
Did they work night shift?
Yeah. Yeah, worked at night too. Day and night when they were real busy there.
Right. How many wharfies were there employed here, do you know?
Oh, yeah, there were heaps and heaps of them.
There was lots of them.
Yeah, a lot of wharfies. Yeah, probably 200 or 300 of them working in different shifts.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was a lot employed.
And did boats wait in the harbour for a turn to get onto the wharf, or did they?
Occasionally, yeah.
The Coffs Harbour port became a very important port after the Second World War because of the immense quantities of timber to be delivered around Australia and overseas. Huge timber dumps were made to hold the timber until the ships could take it. W.A. Brodie was the harbour master for over 25 years. He was a very popular and respected man. He retired in 1947. In 1953, 15 million super feet of timber had been shipped on 99 vessels. The number of ships were diminishing in 1954, with only 72 ships. The second diesel-electric crane came into service in 1956. It was put up in 1953. Only 33 vessels traded at the harbour in 1957. In 1973, the able Tasman left the harbour for the last time. In 1979, the last commercial ship leaves Coffs. In 1989, HMAS Ovens anchored in the harbour for the last time. Was there any other designs for the jetty or the harbour that you know of that was put forward?
They talked about running sheeting around it and filling it with rocks and putting a concrete top on it. And they did it overseas in a few places. That was a fair while back they talked about it.
In 1974, Coffs Harbour Hardwood supplied 6,000 piles to Sumatra for oil tank platforms. Ray McCarthy said each pole was 70 foot long and they were all cut in the Coffs Harbour district. In 1970, the Royal Yacht Britannia was moored in the harbour while the royal family visited. In 1984, after 10 years without being used, the 2 diesel-electric cranes on the jetty are pulled down. They had been in service for more than 30 years. Here the Army uses the Jetty beach for Army duck training. An air ambulance clipped the northern break wall and miraculously avoided hitting these buildings. A wheel from the plane was broken off and left on the wall. The plane made a successful emergency landing at the airport. This all happened one rainy, cloudy morning. May 1977. Vol Nelson dragged in one of the biggest catches of mullet ever recorded. The haul yielded 600 tubs of mullet.
They had single cylinder, mainly they were power Kero motors those days before diesel come out. They were all single cylinders. Some of them had to heat up with a blowtorch in the winter time to get them going. They worked hard, but they caught a lot of leather jackets. They got nothing for them. And they worked hard. The old iceworks those days were at the old butter factory. And they used to have to go and get their ice in a cart and drag it down to the waterfront, crush it up with an iron bar or something and pack the stuff and go to Sydney.
How did they send it to Sydney?
It all went by rail. Every cyclone we'd lose, might be a couple, 2 or 3, sometimes 6. And they'd wash up on the rocks because we couldn't get to them. There was only the jetty then, and we'd sit there all night watching our boats getting bobbed around. Eventually I was chairman at the time and we kept complaining, and every month we'd write a letter, and Matt Singleton was the minister here at the time, and we complained to him. The next thing he come along and said, we're going to build them in a harbour for you. So that was a godsend those days.
Many trapping at that stage?
There wasn't a lot. There was only about 5 of us. More lucrative, a lot easier. You'd go out, we only worked about 7 or 8 traps then, and you'd come in with your 5 or 6 baskets every day, and you'd be home before lunchtime.
Okay, so how would you remember where the traps were?
Well, those days we went on all landmarks. Lining trees up with a mountain, and the reservoir those days was a great thing because as you moved, being right in the foreground, it moved with the hills pretty well. The biggest problem was when they burnt the cane up and around the Grafton area around September, October. There'd be that much smoke that we'd have to go out on time, and looking at your compass, we had no such thing as autopilots in those days. When I first started the co-op, we only had a dozen boats here. That virtually kept the co-op going. Well, there was a lot of fish coming in with those few boats. And it wasn't until the inner harbour was built that it just grew overnight. Then the prawning started. It was a matter of time then that once it became a safe port, then we got boats from everywhere.
Why is the inner harbour so much better?
Certainly a lot safer, but What's happening now is the harbour sanding up, the inner harbour sanding up, even the entrance to the inner harbour. Some of the prawn boats now are bumping the bottom at low tide. It won't be very long before they'll have a dredge in there or something to be done full time in the harbour itself. No, you're not allowed to catch school prawns in the harbour now. That was pretty lucrative back in the old days.
Is that since Parks and Wildlife have taken over?
Yeah, since then, yep.
So what about trawling outside the harbour?
Well, there's certain parts now with the marine park and that where the trawlers can't go where they used to go before. The trappers, they can't work certain areas with their traps. Around the islands, certain distance around the islands, you can't even catch mackerel or kingfish. That really makes it hard. The future doesn't look good with bag limits, and the sizes are upped pretty well now. There's talk of the mulloway now going to a lot higher than what it is, 45 I think it is at the moment. Kingfish are gradually tripped up to 65 centimetres. The fellas that used to chase kingfish and mackerel are finding it very hard now because most of those big fish are around the islands anyhow. The cost of licence has gone up now that everything's unitised. You've got to pay a certain amount a year, and that comes into thousands now. Well, if you caught a certain amount over the years, you were given so many units. And if your licence, this has only just come in, or coming in, and if you didn't have enough units to catch, say, snapper, then you'd have to buy someone else's units, and it's a way of taking boats out of the industry. So there's going to be less and less boats as you go down the track. And it seems crazy that here we are with a coastline as big as anyone in the world, and we can't utilise it. I often go down the waterfront and have a yarn with the boys, and they've got a lot to contend with today.
This frame is at the start of the original Coffs Harbour Jetty. The jetty was first opened in 1892. Just a few feet from this point is the concrete base where a steam crane operated. At 176 metres from the original start of the jetty is the 30th pier or row of piles.